I watched The Substance after everybody brought it up in my Dorian Gray video, and it was beautiful. I am a fan of psychological horror and body horror, and this is one of my favorite genres done weird, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the details that I liked in this movie while thinking about it in terms of Dorian Gray meeting the beauty industry. In a short synopsis, the story of The Substance is about a woman named Elizabeth Sparkle who is quite literally opening on the peak of her fame as her star is installed on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Elizabeth is no longer an old Hollywood star but has taken up filming workout videos, and she is let go from her job as she is aging out of her career in the eyes of her higher-ups. That's when a mysterious company offers for her to try a liquid known as The Substance that can revert her back to her youth, changing her life for the better for a limited time. So we're going into spoilers now, mainly to just discuss a couple of key symbols that I found cool. Like Dorian Gray, I like that this movie about youth isn't only about Elizabeth preserving her beauty. So first off, the star. When it comes to symbols of her youth and good perception, there's obviously the installation of her Hollywood star, the mark of her fame and the peak of her career. Like the Dorian Gray painting, this star will probably be the only thing that people will feasibly remember her by. Whether it as that star is, it's going to be what remains of Elizabeth in the public eye's perception of her, as she is literally swept away over it. People will know her name and her legacy as a Hollywood star, but they will not know anything beyond that nebulous image of her. And usually that is one associated with her in her glory days. Next is the hall. Outside of Elizabeth's workout studio is this hallway that has many portraits of her at her job, aging over the years. And like a great commenter said in my video, Dorian Gray isn't only about age, it's about stagnation. I love that these portraits not only show Elizabeth aging and technically become like a documentation of her life, but it's also her at her same job in the same place for her whole life. She hasn't progressed past this point. Her career has been this workout video. Her life has been this. She ages, but she hasn't gone anywhere new. And it's in the climax that she crawls down this hall and leaves this existing cycle of her life forever. Next, The Substance. The clearest marker of the beauty industry, and I like how non-specific it is. It is a vial full of toxic sludge liquid that could be a stand-in for any kind of procedure, and requires 3 things. Number 1, inherent violence or pain. It is an injectable that has a very clear demarker of being a chemical foreign substance. And not only is it an injection, but it requires an extraction of spinal fluid in order to maintain its effects. And in its effects, Elizabeth experiences cell splitting and watches an entirely different version of herself grow out of herself in laborious detail. Number 2, it requires repetition. The substance, unlike the youth potion in Death Becomes Her, is not a permanent fix. It is an intensive labor that requires a user to not only be conscious of timing themselves when they need to re-up on their procedure, but they must also knowingly inflict pain on themselves again that they are familiar with. Number 3, the vagueness to it. The substance says that it will make you better by unlocking your best potential. It's all very sales heavy with how it speaks and doesn't really give you an actual breakdown of what the consequences are of using it. Elizabeth will share time with this new version of herself, but the instructions are bare bones for something that she's about to put into her body. The consequences of misuse or use of the substance are not really known to her. They are alluded to, but they are vague. And the execution of this promise is probably not what Elizabeth was expecting, nor are the long-term effects after the misuse and reuse of it. And its ultimate effect, perhaps only when overused, but I think perhaps just in use, is that it makes the user ultimately appear older than they would have if they hadn't done this in striving for youth. Last is perception. The story is not strictly about beauty and fame, but it's also about all these people looking upon Elizabeth. There's a lot of these uncomfortable close-ups with old men and leering faces. Even the man who's interested in Elizabeth genuinely has this kind of reverence and adoration while the camera's right there in his face. And I take that as Elizabeth perceiving others perceiving her. And Elizabeth is not only hyper-aware of how other people perceive her, but is also hyper-aware of her flaws, as demonstrated in the bathroom scene. Her relationship with her own body gets more and more hostile as she notices the stark contrast in how she's treated. When she's getting ready for her date, she looks longingly at Sue's body in the bathroom tiles and cannot look at herself properly anymore. It's kind of like how Dorian gazing upon the portrait is him forcibly self-reflecting, but in this instance coming away only worse until the climax where she technically makes peace with that self-image. So yeah, The Substance was a really interesting watch. I would encourage you to go check it out if you haven't already. Perhaps not if you don't like this type of gore, but otherwise, full-on recommendation.